The title of the talk, yeah, it's so I suppose at least a few of you will have noticed this is a wordplay. This is a wordplay on the title of Douglas Adams' second volume in the Hitchhiker cycle. And you may even know, if you have read the novel, if you have seen the movie, last Friday it was Towel Day. It was very appropriate this morning. But in reality, I was asked at some point, what will be the title, PG, for your talk? And then you received 10 of those messages. Please give us a title for your speech. And I probably had too much coffee that morning. And so I went to this because to this title because I think that very seriously, if we continue what we're doing at the pace we're doing it, we will probably be getting the health system we want at the end of the universe. And that will be certainly part of my message today. The other reason, does this work? Yeah. The other reason is in fact 9 years ago. It was the last conference, I believe, before the creation of CAHSPR, but it was the same crowd, in large part the same people, actually. And my friend and colleague Malcolm McClure did this very clever, very concrete, very insightful presentation, The Hitchhiker's Guide to KT, 10 lessons from 10 years of drug benefit policy research. And it was a very impressive, I was very impressed, so I still remember that presentation today. And it was done at a time where for the first time, a few people like myself and like Malcolm were actually starting crossing the line between academia and policy. The thrust of the presentation, and this is actually a title of one of his slides. Could you believe that? Lomas is right. So for those of you who were not born at the time, Jonathan Lomas was the founding CEO of an organization formerly known as CHSRF. The thing in this presentation, those are basically the credo of KT as we have known it for more than 10 years now. And basically the presentation from Malcolm was a vindication of Jonathan's position and ideas. The first is that basically KT is lobbying for better policies, albeit with evidence. That it was kosher to use research funds to support policy applied research, that it was extremely important to maintain a conversation between decision makers and researchers, that we have something to learn about the relevancy, about the importance of research topics from the decision makers as academics when we enter into conversations with them, and that our egos and maybe our careers will suffer because it will be more difficult to get through the normal hurdles of academic promotion with, when you are doing applied research and contributing directly to policy. And I suppose, when I was looking at Malcolm's original presentation, I thought a lot about that question about egos. And I think at the time it was this notion that we will be humbled by the actual knowledge that practitioners will bring to the table. So we are a decade later. So clearly KT is lobbying. I'm not so sure we still insist that much on evidence. It's clear that research funding supports policy, but as we all experience, it becomes, in fact, a requirement, in large part, to access research funds, to be able to demonstrate that it is directly related to a policy. Linkage and exchange are still key. Proximity to decision makers is no more valuable as absolutely necessary because they are, if they're not part of your research team, it's becoming more and more difficult, once again, to get access to research funding, and clearly our egos and our careers are still suffering. I think that I'm not, and it is known from a few of my friends, completely happy with this evolution. I think one of the things we discovered during that period was that opportunity, as I could say, comes in degrees. The first thing is that, contrary to what the doctrine of KT was telling us 10 years ago, I'm not talking about the decision makers in this room, for sure, but the other decision makers, those who are not there this morning. They are not necessarily all created equal. You have people, I'm sure you know that some people are promoted because of seniority, that some people are promoted because of political connections, that some people are promoted because of mere brutality, and they are not necessarily making good research partners. Not all research is of equal quality. It's not true that everything that goes on a poster should actually be bring to the attention of not you, of sure. This is extremely important stuff, but again, the people that have not made it for this morning and this conference. Not everything that goes on a poster should actually be brought to the attention of the minister. It has never been demonstrated that an interest in research and decision skills are related. Actually, you know, I have met throughout my career a lot of people that were incredibly interested in my stuff, that they could spend hours, well, half hours, listening to my stuff, but it doesn't mean that I will let them organize a birthday party. So it makes, again, for some difficulties in just applying the KT program as it was defined 10 years ago. And another thing that I think is getting more serious now is that at the same time we were developing the KT program, people started having visions. I mean, not like airing voices, but they were starting having vision. So everywhere, organizations, decision makers, I've been part of numerous exercises of this sort when I was in government. And it became clear very soon that informed advice, the kind of advice that is produced by research or the methods of scientific research, could come in conflict with the results of those visioning exercises. This is a direct quote, the one, "We don't do knowledge," because I think we're in deep trouble now about this. That comes from a federal ADM. To tell you, you know, it's not an Health Canada ADM, it's another important department of the Government of Canada. But I think it says something about where we are about these questions now. That we don't do knowledge, we do transactions. So, Denis was mentioning my former department, and it's clear for me at this time that Health Canada is slowly drifting back to where it was pre-Kheir. Remember that, you know, the Kheir inquiry has, at the time, defined what Health Canada should do to maintain the quality, the integrity of the science that was performed within the department. Clearly, we're going, because of the budget, because of different reorganization and cuts, we're going backwards at this time. Because I suppose Health Canada will be comfortable saying that they don't do knowledge either. Information without intelligence. So this is where we are now in so many cases. This is not new, you know, the idea that you have so much information, but in the same time you don't know how to organize it. I would say that the conservative government did something to reestablish the balance by abolishing the long census. Less information, so it creates a sort of balance. But all in all, we're still caught with this problem of having much less of an analytical capacity to deal with information. Structural fragmentation in our capacity to produce analysis and research. What I call uprooted innovation, in the sense that we are all talking and looking at best practices, but very often without any capacity to locate them into their context. And I think all this is in large part responsible for the situation in which we are, which is a situation of unchanging diagnosis and prescription. This is a quote from my friend Chantal Hébert in a paper she published just after the release of the last Senate report, Time for Transformative Change. And as you could see, it's part of, as well, of my inspiration to have picked this particular theme for the presentation. This notion that if we were to do more of the same for an open-ended period of time, somehow the elusive goal of a more efficient healthcare system will be reached. So what can we do? Let's go back to hitchhiking. I don't know for you, but I'm still of a generation that did a lot of hitchhiking. At 14, I think I did the Montreal-Gaspé twice in the same summer, 15 on the roads of Britain and France. So I have some experience about hitchhiking. I think it's a very nice metaphor to talk about what we're doing, at least to discuss my own career. Oh, the quote in the title, so it comes from Henry Adams. It's an American novelist. He came to Canada in 1904, and he did the train trip between Winnipeg and Toronto. And he was asked at the end of the trip, how do you find it? And he said, well, Canada's a nice country, but it needs edits. The first thing I think when we discuss hitchhiking as a metaphor is that hitchhiking, we have normally a sense of destination. We don't necessarily go where we want to go, but we have a general sense of destination, and I think we have that sense of destination right now. I'm forced in my current position to read a lot about the environment, and I think the best term for me to describe what we try to achieve is probably this: ecological integrity for the health system, a sense of coherence. There's a lot of discussion about integration at this moment, and as you all know, integration is a means to an end. What we try to do and to achieve is that no part of the health system are ending by undoing what other parts are doing, and to bring that kind of coherence to the system. We want a system that will be able to adapt to a changing environment in terms of demographics, education, wealth. We want a system that is able to mutually regulate the environment in which, so be regulated and regulate the environment in which it is located. Denis and I have been part at some point in our career of important conversation about how do you inform not only health policy, but policy in general from a public health, population health point of view. And finally, I think the system we want to build will be a responsible system in the sense that it's a huge part of social activity in our societies. And the way we treat our employees, the way we account for our expenses, the way we deal with inequalities has a huge impact on the rest of society. And I think it's our responsibility to show through example what we want to see in the society around us. We haven't know how to do that at this point, I think. This is a paper from R.J.M. Bomer in the New England in 2011, a very good paper, short paper, neat. And you know, basically what you have a prescription here to transform organizations to achieve exactly that kind of ecologically and integral kind of system I was just talking about. Define very precisely who are your clients. Try to deal with the infrastructure design to make sure that you are addressing the needs of those particular clients. Make sure that you measure what you're doing. Make sure that you have a feedback loops and a reflexive system in the organization to take care of that information. So we know how to do this, and we have a sense of destination. When you do hitchhiking, it's not unusual to be stuck at the same place for a very long time. And I don't have the time this morning to tell you too many stories about that, but it happens. And clearly, it happens in our world. No, I'm not supposed to be there. Oh, this is not the good presentation. That's very fine. I will go there. I am sorry for that. So let's go there first. This is Kheir's piece in the Globe and Mail last Thursday, if I'm not wrong. And I know it's unfair to pick on André because he was one among the first to start denouncing and complaining about the Groundhog Day syndrome and the fact that we are always discussing the same issues. You know, I look at this list, and I suppose you do like I do. Your reaction is to think, well, you know, we're all in favor. We will all like this to happen. But in fact, it is probably more complicated than it looks like. Again, I don't want to go into details here, but you know, let's take pharmacare, for instance, and it's clear to me that it's much more complicated to build a sound pharmacare without going into a complete disaster than it looks like first. But still, the sense of being stuck there for a very long time, I think, is very strong. Okay, I will go there first. I'm sorry, this is not the good presentation, actually. So, the other thing when you actually do hitchhiking is that you meet, for the most part, very generous, great human beings. I said mostly. I have met scary people hitchhiking, and I have met scary people doing what I'm doing now. Remember once I'm in the office of a Ontarian hospital CEO, and he's banging his fist on the table, shouting. The deputy minister of the time was Phil Aston, a good friend, and he was previously at the head of a regional health authority in Vancouver. So he was banging on the table saying, "This man from Vancouver, this man from Vancouver, this man from Vancouver." It was scary, and I've met scary people, as I probably all did. Now I have to find this one. Yeah. So the last thing is the limited number of conversation topics. Especially in the last 10 years, I think we have all sensed this feeling of gloom and doom. The sense that we're not able actually to meet all the expectations and standards that we were promising we will actually be implementing and introducing in the system. The first is clearly the failure to meet the expectations created by numerous reforms, the difficulty of meeting standards of quality, especially in terms of timeliness and access, the difficulty of keeping expenditures within the expected range, and finally to answer calls for accountability. I've been in numerous meetings internationally, and I remember the time where you were invited because you were Canadian, in large part because Canada was conceived and perceived as a leader in terms of innovation. You know, we were the first country where the social determinants of health have actually be part of a government policy. We're the first country where evidence-based medicine has actually been taught in the Faculty of Medicine. We're the first country to regionalize our health services. We're the first country to integrate social and health services together. And now when we go in conferences, I'm very often asked, I was in the States 2 weeks ago, and the topic is how come Canada is no more a sort of international leader? So gloom and doom, what to do? Well, one of the, I should find back. Yeah, so one of the first ride I got, and a very good one, was a ride with Romanow and the Royal Commission. It was an interesting ride, and it started one night in Toronto. There was a dinner it was the very beginning of the commission. Marshallton was somewhere in the room, was there. Romanow and a few other colleagues from all over Canada. It was at Massey College. And inevitably at the time, someone will start talking about sacred cows. It is now adult conversations. The language has changed, but it's the same idea. The idea was that basically it is impossible to transform the health system of this country because you're facing coward politicians that lack the courage to actually go against the will of an ignorant, frightful, selfish public. And my reaction at that dinner, maybe this is why I got my job. I always try to understand why, actually, I've been appointed there. But anyway, my reaction to this sacred cow conversation at the time was to say, well, you know what? I'm not unhappy to be living in a country that defines itself through the way it treats sick people, rather than being focused on a foreign monarch or a F-35 or whatever. In fact, I'm quite happy to be part of this society. I don't think it's a sacred cow. I think this notion of a most cherished program is in the first paragraph of the Romanow report, the introduction by the commissioner. And it's clear that the healthcare system is the most important element of our Canadian identity. It has been measured by all polling firms time and time and time again. The foreign monarch, if you're interested, is at 8%. What did we learn during the commission? Well, as I just said, we certainly learned that it is a defining element of our national identity. We learned that the system belongs to the people. We're told that repeatedly during the consultations. You know, this system doesn't belong to the doctors. It doesn't belong to government. It belongs to us. We discovered that the public knew much more than we think, and finally that there will be no trust in the system if we're not able to introduce some form of accountability in the system. The other message from Romanow, remember, was that it will be possible to buy change. And I think that 10 years later, after we spent, and God knows how much we have tried to buy change in the last 10 years, I think it's not clear that we have been that successful. I picked this, I found that very interesting. Ben Bernanke at the time was still a university professor, was not yet the head of the Federal Reserve. But I think it's so appropriate to our own situation, this notion of a lack of audacity in the way we actually try to implement, transform, change, open the health system. This notion that the apparent unwillingness of the authorities to try anything that isn't absolutely guaranteed to work. There are other reasons for that. The fact is that most reforms fail. I've worked a lot on failures in recent years. I think we won't be where, I've said that publicly a few times, but we won't be where we are now in terms of patient safety if we haven't learned from failures, and we never do that in health policy. We only concentrate on best practices without never trying to actually understand why from time to time we fail. In fact, most reforms fail. They fail for all sorts of reasons. I have mentioned here a few competing hypotheses. Jean-Louis Denis has mentioned and the fact that most reform actually have very limited impact on the way the care is received or provided. You know, when you just change the letterhead of organizations, you're not actually reforming anything. Lawrence Brown from Columbia has suggested a very interesting hypothesis that there is a proliferation of options and models, and that most of them are not compatible. It's very difficult, actually, for a decision maker to choose the right one, given the incredibly wide range of options that are open to them. Carolyn Thuy has suggested that because we have more and more hybrid models in our society, so models that are very far from the purely public social insurance-based model of the continental type, and on the other end, the tax-based system as the one the Brits have known, for example. The fact that our models are more and more hybrids, opening themselves to market incentive and so on and so forth, becomes more and more difficult to use the traditional instruments of regulation that we have for those systems. And finally, one of the most important lessons that comes from my colleague Hervé Lazare is this idea that politics always trumps policy. That whatever, even if you're thinking and you design the best policy ever based on the best evidence ever, what will count in the end is, do you have a political champion for that reform? Is there someone that has a true and real interest in achieving this particular result? So I got another ride. This time with Health Canada, as Denis mentioned in his introduction. And during that ride with Health Canada, I worked with two very competent deputy ministers, and that have taught me a lot about the way politics meets policy, about the way you can actually combine policy and politics. From the second one, I will start with him. I'm the traditional policy advisor. I come to see my deputy. Oh, you know what? There is a very interesting question, and that's why we should do something about it. The first thing I learned is that problems are only interesting when they come with solutions. Solutions are only interesting when they come with benefits. And by benefits, I mean both political and bureaucratic benefits. That those benefits are interesting for the political machine only if they could be achieved without delays. And which was probably more difficult to accept for someone like me, is that sometimes delays are coming with advantages. That delaying a decision could mean sometimes that the problem will solve itself, or that another administration will have to take care of it. The second deputy introduced me, he was actually the first, so introduced me to the tension between policy and decision making. This was not at all evident because most of us, we use those two terms interchangeably, like if it was exactly discussing the same people doing the same things in the same place. But actually, there is a difference between the two. The machinery of government, I discovered that as well very early on in the process, is essentially there to make decisions. And the people making decisions and the people making policy in a department like Health Canada are very different people. It's nearly impossible to get a policy implemented if you're not able to translate it into a sequence of decisions, because the only thing the machinery of government is able to do is to make decisions. So the narrative is not that important at that level. And finally, decisions are made, and sometimes those decisions will have the policy within their context, but sometimes not. I have seen decisions made based on policy. I have seen decisions made completely independently of policy. And I've seen decisions made and justified by the policy once they have made. This creates a huge tension between research and expertise. It creates also a tension between what I call evidence of and evidence for. And I will give you a few quick examples. This is something I developed while I was in Health Canada. So it's a model. Those are not real numbers. It's just an illustration. This is an attempt to plot health expenses according to age. We are using here, I was using GDP mostly because I was in an argument with a group of people working with Don Berwick has said in a conference once that he thought that everything that we spend over 6% in the health system is waste. And I start arguing with this group to know what was the base for this statement, and secondly, is 6% the right level? And so we start arguing about this. But basically, the idea here, as you could see, is that we spend some money on people when they're young, and we start spending more when they are old, and we spend most of the money in the last years of life. We all know that. The interesting part, and this I learned going to a conference organized by the Alberta Medical Heritage Foundation at one point, is that I try and I ask myself, what if I was to plot what the evidence is telling me about the way I should allocate resource in the system? And I got a very different curve, as you could see. And one example of the time was this notion that one of the best investments you could do in terms of public health would be to have an impact on the diet of teenage girls between the age of 10 and 13. So the idea is unplug your mother at the hospital and pay for a better food in high school. The problem is that it's nearly impossible to sell that to people at this time in our system. And I could tell you, nobody knows how you get from the curve number 1 to curve number 2. The electoral system, the democratic system itself, is made to support curve number 1, not curve number 2. And I don't know how to do it. And I will be very interested if you have ideas. One idea would be to have a champion for those ideas. So is that role could come from Ottawa? Well, be careful for what you wish for. 9 years ago, when Malcolm did his presentation, I was also making a presentation, and someone came to the microphone, someone of you came to the microphone, and did a rant about the fact that the federal government was terribly poor at dealing with health services, that the federal government should go out of health. And basically, he must be very happy today. So those are basically the four positions that we, in our federal system, we could have in terms of federal involvement in health. A paper published beginning of I think 2001 in the BMJ arguing that we should have a national health service in the hands of the federal government. The by default position for years has been primus inter pares. Every conference you organize, you have a federal co-chair, and the federal government perceives itself as a leader in the field. I think where we are now is the federal government just saying, we're just one among many, and we would just like to participate. The real problem is the push for what they have called real accountability. You got Busencool last year, so you know what I'm talking about, but I think I still see sign of that in the budget. The recent decision of the government of Canada of getting rid of the RCMP plan, for instance, and which will be basically the idea that the federal government will have no role anymore to play in our world. This is certainly will create a new context, and once again, I'm not sure of what it will mean. This is why I've put question marks everywhere. Will the Flaherty proposal reveal to be a sustainable growth rate? Personally, I must say I think yes. I discussed that for a long while before the announcement with a lot of people, both in Ottawa and the provinces, and everybody is unhappy now, but in fact it might be a sustainable growth rate, but we don't know. How do we will react in the current context to global drivers? A lot of what is going on in Ontario, in my opinion now, has nothing to do with Ontario, but has to do with global drivers of the worldwide financial situation and technologies and transformation of the sort. We have no idea where institutional leadership will come from. Will it come from the provinces? Will it come from the Council of the Federation? Will it come from the numerous organizations that are active in the field? I don't know. What I know is that values are changing. The same values that we have seen at the time, that were so prevalent at the time of Romanow, are changing. You know all this. You know that the system is transforming by stealth, that the new demand for services is met quite effortlessly, depending on the media traction that the people are able to get for the new drug or the new treatment, that there is more fees and more direct payments in the system, that there are more options for queue jumpers. You're not obliged now necessarily to board a plane for the US. You could actually go to Quebec, to Alberta, to BC, and jump the queue that way when you're not doing it within your own provincial system through more or less open processes. And finally, I think for me the real signal has been when Danny Williams announced, when he decided to go seek treatment in the US, I think 3-4 years ago, and his famous declaration, my heart, my health, my choice. And because it was the first time, very evidently, that a member of the elite was breaking with the lifeboat ethics that was the signature of our system. This crisis, and you cannot live in Quebec without thinking about that every day, at least every night between 8 and 9, 10 to 9. It's not only a crisis of redistribution, it's clearly there. There is a crisis of redistribution. There is an increasing gap in income and welfare, but I think there are also generational issues, and this is something the welfare state doesn't know how to deal with. This is something that the welfare state is not able to solve. And there is also, you know, in this country since 1995, with the happy parenthesis of the Romanow Commission, we have mostly discussed about 3 things: public deficits, consumptions, and growth. This is not particularly, you know, most citizens have other topics of preoccupation, and there is a cruel lack of deliberative space to address those different issues. This is, as Denis mentioned in his own introduction, clearly a governance structure crisis, and that we will need to address. So my pet peeve at this time is a Canadian beverage report. Beverage is the report that has basically created the blueprint for the welfare state in 1942 in Britain. It's a very interesting piece of thinking, if you have a chance to give it a look. There are a few principles that are mentioned here. It's easier to read there. That I think could apply to our own situation at this moment. The first is that Beveridge was adamant that he should not be restricted by considerations of sectional interests in thinking about the future. The most important thing for me is this idea of a comprehensive policy of social progress. The idea that we should be dealing with health, not in isolation with the rest, but in thinking about the other social programs that we have. There is an impact of the reform of unemployment insurance and on healthcare. There is an impact of the reform of pensions that they are planning on healthcare. There is an impact on what the discussion about education and healthcare. And we need at some point someone putting all this together. I think this will put an end of what I've called the healthcare illusion. So I mentioned I was in the States 2 weeks ago for a conference. Steve Shortell made a very good presentations about quality and so long and so forth. But I was struck, and this is where I came with this idea of an healthcare illusion, that what he was discussing is how to make our organizations better, but the discourse itself was completely closed to the social and moral dimensions of health and healthcare, the fact that it is influenced by the society in which we are. We have to start making a difference between the micro constraints, where we know that we need individual incentives, and the discussion about macroeconomic equilibrium. I've seen priority setting and rationing. In the last few months, I have seen at least 3 reports coming from the UK on rationing. We need to start addressing those issues because it has an impact on the other public goods. And we all know, we all remember Picard's slide. We all believe in social determinants. So if we're serious about social determinants, we must be serious about the other public goods. We cannot be only concentrating on healthcare. And admit that in a plural society, we will have a plurality, a diversity of need that needs to be addressed by the system. I think it will create a new landscape for research. We will start addressing what I have called new issues, new approaches, new solutions, instead of always focusing on short-term issues that have been picked by decision makers because we are supporting their efforts. We need to start looking at other issues. We need to look more clearly, for instance, at the intersection between the different sectors of social policy. We need to think about new approaches to problems. There is a revolution going on now in economics around the general theme of the behavior of agents. We need to introduce that in our own discourse about healthcare and health. And we need to start thinking about new solutions. Within the fact that using the opportunities that are opened by the fact that science is open to debate and criticism, and that the scientific method is a very good place to test new ideas. We could end that way by having, instead of sacred cows, a few unicorns. And the list is not closed because what I would like, what I wish is that you will have your own list of unicorns, of things that you would like to see happening. Patient-driven, I hate patient-centered services. For me, it sounds like Air Canada, client-centered service. Patient-driven services, user-defined package of services, letting the user a word and the way they will choose what should be or shouldn't be covered. A new professional landscape. The professional landscape in Canada has nearly not changed for the last 50 years. Cost transparency, value framework, and a thing that I would certainly would seen as a huge progress, which is efficient and valued federalism. So where we could actually use the fact that we have a federal structure to use provinces as laboratories and to experiment and learn and try something new in our system. This is a thing I'm forced to say everything. My yearly bonus is actually in large part influenced by the number of quotes of Pierre Trudeau I'm able to make in my speeches. So this one I think is you could see that as a call to arms for researchers. What I hope is one of my important messages this morning, if ever, that we start to regain our independence from the construction that has been put in place in the last 10 or 15 years by the KT program, and start, affirming that invention, discovery, curiosity are okay. So long, and thanks for all the fish.